Blackburn South. My name's Susan Berkeley. My question is about transitioning workforces from one type of energy to another, because we're talking about families and communities, and even though I'm a great believer in renewable energy, I also want a just transition for the people who work in the coal industry, especially in those communities like the Latrobe Valley in Victoria, where it's very intensive and there's not many alternatives for them. Thank you.
You refer to just transition. This was a very important part of the Paris Agreement. There was a lot of lobbying, particularly by union organisations at a global level, led by Sharon Burrow, who people might remember ran the ACTU here, and now runs the global union movement. And it was resisted by some governments, including by all reports from the NGOs, this government, about having an explicit statement in there supporting just transition being part of this transition, that it is one that supports regions and workers. And the Latrobe Valley is obviously probably the most obvious example around the country, but there are many others. And over the summer I visited all of them. The Collie River Valley in WA, Latrobe, Illawarra, Hunter, talked to local councils, unions, businesses about how we were going to be able to manage this transition. And I think those communities are recognising this isn't something that Josh or Janet or I or Malcolm or Bill are going to decide whether or not it happens. It is happening. And I think for those communities, what happened in Port Augusta in South Australia was quite a shock, because this was a couple of power stations that were closed with very little planning, and that's not really a criticism of the company, it's just that there is no national framework to plan this in an orderly way, and with very little support forthcoming from the Commonwealth Government. I mean, the money that the government put on the table really after 3 months of there being notice of this closure is not much more than would fund them updating their CVs and doing some job interview training. We need much more than that. The policy that we've put into our document, which frankly we borrowed from the Australian National University, a model that was put out late last year, would look at a reverse auction type arrangement for closure, which would happen in an orderly way, of the oldest, heaviest polluting power generators, and an industry levy from the rest of the industry brought to bear, not only to deal with the cost of closure and rehabilitation of the mine and such like, but importantly, support for regional economic diversification and the worker impacts. And I think that is a very, very important thing for us to be having a discussion about.
Well, thanks, Mark. Not much to disagree with there. I mean, I think this is a very important question, and hopefully a bipartisan area where we can all agree, because I think the lady's question brings into focus that we're talking about people's lives, and there are different views in different parts of Australia. If we had 500 people gathered in Mackay in Queensland or Townsville, there would be very different views, dare I say, to the views being expressed by many of the people in this room. There is a lot of anxiety out there about what does this transition away from fossil fuels, and we're talking about coal, what does it mean for the tens and thousands of families who have relied on that, whether they're blue-collar workers in multiple generations or indeed white-collar workers. Now, there are jobs in renewables, and we're absolutely focused on that. But when we're moving out of some of these other industries, it has to be done in an orderly way. We have to ensure that there are new opportunities for them, and it might be in energy sectors or it might be in other sectors, and that's why, for example, the free trade agreements have been incredibly important in Northern Australia for tourism and for other service delivery. But at the end of the day, we're talking about people and we're talking about their lives. And I saw it firsthand in Queensland, in Townsville, with the nickel refinery that closed there, and 500 people lost their jobs. That was, the lights were out for them with no notice, and they all had kids and families to feed. And so when we're talking about the transition, whether here in Victoria and other parts of the country, I think we have to bear that in mind. What does it mean for people on the ground when we're making our decisions as well?
Thank you for the question, because it is really important, because it is people's lives at stake, and it's their livelihoods and their well-being. The good news is that, once we actually acknowledge that we are shifting out of fossil fuels and that the shift is occurring and the transition is occurring, well, then we can start planning for it. And that's the frustration at the moment. As you can see, we have to be getting out of fossil fuels. So let's acknowledge that and let's start doing the planning. I know in the Latrobe Valley, they've been looking at transition possibilities for quite a few years now, and the mood has changed. People do recognise that, yes, those coal-fired power stations are going to be closing down. And so then it's just it's a matter of working out what incentives, what investment needs to be put into that area to give people a fair go and to give them a decent livelihood. And it is going to cost money, that's the other thing. I mean, we can have fine words, but it is going to need some government investment to actually enable a lot of these new industries and new initiatives to occur. But as part of our Just Transition initiative, we've set over all of Australia over the forthcoming, I'm not sure whether it's 4 years or 10 years, in the order of $1 billion is going to need to be spent to enable that transition to occur, and it needs to be spent, and the planning needs to occur now to make sure that people are looked after.
Thank you very much.